Good morning. Welcome to the Patriot Radio News Hour. Happy Hump Day. Folks, we're about halfway through. Well, this is your substitute teacher, Glen, Biddle, sitting in for Joe today. Joe has invoked the 12-hour rule. Apparently, he had festivities last night pre-planned, some party he was going to, so I think he knew he would have a big head this morning, so he did not want to risk coming in here because we have awesome, super special guest today with us, and he wanted to make sure we had somebody on that could talk with a clear head, and that's me. I haven't had anything to drink probably in 20-some years, so I definitely have a clear head. Now, 800-951-0592, be your own central banker. Today we are, in honor of our guests, we're having Glen Tate and Shelby Gallagher on. They are from Prepping 2.0. They're also acclaimed authors. Glen Tate has written the series 299 Days, and Shelby has written a Great State series. There's 3 books there. Just incredible. They are preppers, and the reason this audience needs to hear this. Think about this. We're coming to you, all over the internet, but primarily in the Phoenix area. Think about this, Phoenix listeners. What threats do you face that possibly you might need to prepare for? Could it be a water crisis? Could it be one of these great words that the Weather Channel comes up with, a derecho, one of those downdraft winds, or a haboob, the big dust storm? What could it be? Obviously, excessive heat. How do you plan for that? Or flash flooding. When it rains real hard, those wadis and everything fill up with water, and they'll wash you away. You got to be very careful. So, just something to think about. Do you have a plan in place for that type of emergency, or could it be something far worse? Could it be the issue of the border? Do we have more problems of people coming into the area from the border that could cause a problem? Could it be societal collapse? Could it be civil war? Could it be real war? Could it be a nuclear strike? Any of these things. Obviously we don't want any of these things to happen, but just in case they do, shouldn't we be prepared? Okay, obviously you would want to be prepared around your house. Do you have fire extinguishers? Do you have a fire, a smoke detector? All those things. You do that in your house. So why not be prepared for something if a long-term situation where you maybe lose power and have to go without power for a while, you're able to handle things. So that's why we have Glen and Shelby on with us today. We're going to talk to them in just a little bit. Today, one of the big things that we talk about in the prepper world is to have fractional material. We sell gold and silver, so something to have. We call it utility silver, that junk silver, used for barter, small purchases. There's lots of things that can be currency in the real world. We'll talk a little bit later about how ice can be a gold or a currency. But we're offering $50 today at $140 a roll. And you can give Wendy a call at 800-951-0592. That's our special today, $50 at $140. Okay. So today, obviously, we're a gold and silver company, but we're also going to be probably talking about steel, aluminum, brass, and lead. We have, we're talking firearms. That's going to be pretty cool. Okay. So let's get right to our guest. So, Glen Tate, are you with me?
I certainly am. 2 Glens. 2 Glens is better than none, and as we say in the prepping world, 1 is none, 2 is 1. Always have a backup. We got Glens coming out our ears right now.
Absolutely. We're Glen Square today, which is great. So we're so lucky to have you as our guest today, and we'll have Shelby on in a second. But, I heard you mention on Joe's podcast how you discovered the Patriot Trading Group, the Patriot Radio News Hour. Can you tell us how you stumbled upon this show?
Yeah, it's really a cool story, and I have to say as a personal remark that it's really cool coming full circle, having started to listen to Joe's show 10 years ago, and now being on it. You want to talk, that's like, the kid that listens to Led Zeppelin and then, gets to sit in and play drums with them or something. It's like crazy. But anyway, about 10 years ago, 2008, 2009, when Obama got elected, a whole bunch of us, and the numbers don't lie. You can look at gun sales, you can look at sales of prepping materials, sales of books for that matter. A whole bunch of us out there said, oh my goodness gracious, a formerly great country, the United States of America, just elected a socialist. This is not good. And of course, we had the big quote, recession. It was actually a depression. Historians will clarify that later on. The idea that it was a Great Recession is just being nice. It was a depression. But anyway, yeah, this huge economic problem, a socialist in office, and a lot of us said, you know what? This system we rely on to make sure that we get our Doritos at the store all the time, and you know, we have natural gas flowing, we have water flowing, the police arrive, you call 911, and really good police officers arrive en masse in about 2 minutes, all these things. That could go away really easy. We live in a very, very fragile economy and social system. And speaking of social stuff, the beginning of the Obama presidency was the beginning of intentional racial and other divides that have been, you know, fueled and accelerated, which is terrible. I hate that stuff. But so we looked around and we said, we got to start taking care of ourselves because nobody else is going to. And this is the evolution of my character, who's me, in the 299 Days books. There's 10 of them. They're on audiobook too, so a lot of people don't read. I don't read. I read all day long. I'm a lawyer, for goodness sakes. I know, don't hate me, but I'm a good lawyer. A liberty lawyer. But anyway, so it's that journey from realizing how fragile things are to realizing you, individual person out there, man or woman, need to do something to actually take care of yourself. And so that was 2009. There's the backdrop for where my head was. And I guess when we come back on this next segment, I can tell you, I can actually answer your question about how I came,
well, thank
came
you.
to PTG. You bet.
Yes, all right, because I had the same journey to PTG as you did. So when we come back, we'll talk about that. We'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen. And welcome back to the Patriot Radio News Hour, 800-951-0592. We're with us today is Glen Tate and Shelby Gallagher from Prepping 2.0. Shelby, are you with us?
I am. How are you today?
I'm doing great. We're just trying to make sure we have all the volume levels right so we can all talk to each other. I just wanted to tell you, Shelby, yesterday your interview on our open forum program with Gunnar Rowe talking about his experience in Puerto Rico when Hurricane Maria went by was by far it was intriguing to listen to. It perfectly illustrates why people need to be prepared and what can actually happen to them when, as they say, the fecal matter hits the rotary oscillator, and it hit him pretty hard down there. And thank you so much for doing that. Well, I'm going to come right back to you in a second. I want to go back to Glen now. Glen, thank you so much for being on with us today. Tell us about how you found Patriot Trading Group, how you found our news show.
Yeah, so there I was in 2009, and I realized podcasts are a great way to learn things, and they're entertaining. You can make the best use of your time listening to the radio or podcast. So it's pretty simple. I went to iTunes, and I typed in Patriot, because I'm a Patriot. I want to listen to other Patriots. There were a bunch of shows that came up, and I listened to some of them, and some of them were kind of weird, I got to be honest. And I thought, Patriot Radio News Hour. Boy, that kind of hits all the stuff I'm looking for, Patriot stuff, and it's news. And I was hooked, and I started listening to, at the time, Eric Cedarstrom, and then Joe would pop in occasionally, and then Joe started being on the show more, and then it became the Joe Show, and I learned a ton. And I mean, I'm a critical thinker. I don't just buy into stuff willy-nilly. I mean, it has to make sense. I'm a lawyer. I live in the world. I'm a litigator. I live in the world of evidence. Stuff needs to be proven to me, And I would listen to his stuff, and I'd go and see headlines, and I would say, oh, my goodness, this guy's right. I learned a ton about economics. In fact, I've told Joe this, and this was on the Prepping 2.0 show you mentioned. I thanked Joe because a lot of the economic stuff that's in the 299 Days books is based on what Joe taught me, basically, about Federal Reserve and debt and inflation and the use of gold and silver. And so I started listening. I was hooked, and that's the story. And now we're customers, and we love it. We have fractional materials. We're in the metals plan, and we couldn't be happier. So it's been a really cool full circle evolution from listener to customer / guest. Holy smokes.
Well, thank you so much for being a customer and listening and your podcast. Now, I know what a good podcast sounds like, and your podcast, Glen and Shelby, are off the chart. They are so good to listen to, and they're not too long. They're just perfect to listen to. It's just and they're such great topics. And we'll talk later on how our listeners can listen in on those. Now, Glenn, your book, the 299-Day Series, I've starting to reading them now, and the level of detail and research you put into that story makes it's a very gripping account. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got started on that and how that kind of plays into your everyday life and how you see what could happen to our country?
Yeah, very interesting story. It started off with the Easter Bunny, and everyone out there is thinking, oh my goodness, this guy on this radio show right now is insane. He's talking about the Easter Bunny. Nope, it actually makes sense. I started prepping, as I described earlier, realized I needed to. My ex-wife was very reluctant, very hesitant, and downright angry about the fact that she thought her husband had lost his mind, and so I had to prep in secret. So the books are all about what I actually did, and I would listen to podcasts, I would watch YouTube channels, I had the blessing, and I mean that in every sense of the word, of having a Green Beret friend. that always comes in handy, and worked with him and my real team that's in the books. The books are about 97% true. Book 1, which is the past tense and present tense, and I just started writing down all the stuff that I did and that my friends said and that I said to them, and everyone says, "Oh, this dialogue's amazing. It's so realistic." Well, that's because it is real, and anyway, so I started just prepping and just learning stuff and put it in the book because I couldn't stop writing. Back to the Easter Bunny, I had to have a reason when stuff fell apart that I could say to my now ex-wife, I could say, here's all this stuff that magically appears in the garage because it was off in a storage unit. And I had to have an explanation to her for why that happened. And also, in fairness and kindness, I'm a kind person, I didn't want to rub it in her face. I didn't want to, say I told you so, because that's really not a good way to start off the most difficult period of your lives, which is when there's a collapse. You need to be together for that. And so I said, I came up with this. I was going to come up with the Easter Bunny story, and I was going to tell her, listen, honey, the Easter Bunny dropped this stuff off. Just roll with it. Just go with it. And that was my way of saying, it's taken care of. Let's focus on what we need to do now. And I started, because I'm a lawyer and I present information, I started doing a little Post-it note with little bullet points about what I was going to say in the Easter Bunny story, right? I was going to say, this is why I prepped. This is what I did. This is how we're going to use these various materials. This is the mindset we need to have. Well, those bullet points were like the perfect explanation for why people ought to prep, how they ought to prep, and how they ought to proceed thereafter. So this Post-it note became 1 page of notes, right? And then it became 3 pages of notes. And then I thought, I've never written fiction before. So I'm just going to write a chapter that's basically the dialogue between me and her, and it's going to be the Easter Bunny story. And it's going to be a few pages, and I'll put it up on an internet forum and see what happens. Well, I couldn't stop writing, Glenn. I mean, I could not stop writing. I would get up at 3 in the morning and write and write and write. And then I wrote these books, 90 hours of audio, by the way, 4,000 pages without her knowing about it, which in retrospect was not a real strengthening feature for a marriage. And just could not stop writing. I attribute it, I know this isn't a religious show, I'm a Christian, I attribute it to God wanting me to get a message out, which was about prepping and also prepping humanely and treating people decently and not just using a collapse as an excuse to go out and kill a bunch of people that you never really liked anyway, and all of that. So that's the long-winded answer, but it was really the Easter Bunny and that Post-it note that turned into 4,000 pages. And obviously, I've never written fiction before. It's been hugely popular, the series. I mean, it's kind of a thing with preppers. It's one of those books, there are a couple others that a lot of preppers have read, and they go, oh, yeah, I know about that. And that couldn't have happened with my talent alone. So that's how the books came about. And every time I'm asked this question or I go back and remember the process of writing it, I think to myself, what a lucky guy I am, because I just wrote down what I was doing in conversations with cool friends, and the rest has just taken off.
Well, that's great. That means it's sincere, it's real, and it's believable. And if it takes the Easter Bunny to get that across, hey, that's great. Now, Shelby, your book, A Great State, your 3-book series, I just finished the first book of that, and I talked to you before about this. It tells a great story, and if I didn't know anything about prepping, by the end of your first book, I would be well on my way to knowing how to do it. Can you just explain your thought process in your book? And I tell you what, it mirrors current events, and there are so many things in the news, even today, that I saw you posted on your website today about services being cut to lower class individuals or low income people that could spark a collapse. Go ahead and talk about that for us, please.
Well, yeah. In the last few days, President Trump has put out a proposal. So far, it's just a proposal to not completely cut, but to cut parts of the food stamp program, the federal food stamps program. And in my first book, I talk about that, how there's this winnowing, this chipping away at that service, and people are going to lose their minds over it and riot. And I have riots in the streets over that issue, because when you start taking people's food away, they get a little testy. And I think that the three of us in this conversation would agree these are subsidized programs that have been abused and are not helping people that really need help. Subsidies like this do not help people. They enslave them into poverty. And so I think we would all agree this Trump needs to come up with this proposal. But on the other hand, people are going to get really upset, and people are already upset in this country. So yeah, so when that headline came out, I'm like, yeah, I put it on social media. I kind of nailed it. Yeah. So that's what you're talking about there. So, but if you want, I can go back and tell everyone again what was my inspiration for the books. I think that was part of your question. I'm not sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. What's your inspiration? What got you started?
Well, what got me started, and we talked about this, I think, yesterday, was the 2016 election, watching things unfold, especially living in a super, beyond crazy liberal city at the time, and just thinking, gosh, if people are resisting and they're rioting right now, I lived in Portland, Oregon, what is this going to look like as it continues to unfold? And so that was going on, and at the same time, living where I was living, that there really is a family cabin, in my family was, in Colorado, that I had always known to be, it was always agreed upon to be a bug-out location. Well, that cabin was sold during that time. So during this time, I'm thinking to myself, the one time that I might have actually needed a bug-out location, and it's gone. And if you're a prepper, that makes your blood run cold. And so I wrote about what I was seeing, this unprecedented time in our history with such a resisting of an election. And the other thing that caught me was, and I write about this in book one, and you know this, the human trafficking situation in our country. In 2016, Oregon, at that time where I lived, was considered the number one in the nation for human trafficking, because there's such a pornography strip club sort of industry, and it's not talked about, and it's not addressed or anything like that. Well, it's because, and I talked about it very specifically, there's high ups in the government of Oregon that will never let that happen. Well, here we are, a few years later. It's kind of crazy. We're seeing things like the Epstein situation happening. We're seeing child trafficking happening at our southern border. Imagine if this is what it's like in quote-unquote pristine times when there's not a collapse. Imagine what that will be like if there is a collapse. It's just going to be 1,000 times over worse. And so that is kind of my mission for writing these books is, women, get your act together so that when there is a collapse, you are not having to make tragic decisions to feed yourself. We see this in Venezuela. Women are having to sell themselves and their children so that they can eat. That is, and when you watch things like, food stamps getting cut and things like that, you could see that human tragedy, the trajectory for that. So that was actually my mission for writing the books, is women, get your act together. Yeah.
Well, and I have to tell you, your book, I couldn't put it down when I started reading it. And Glenn, I'm going to tell you right now, I just picked yours up yesterday. I'm starting to, and I love it. I have a friend that's read all of them, and he says, "Oh, Glenn, you've got to get through them. They're so good." I'm like, "Well, I kind of want to savor them because I enjoy this, and because I'm a prepper as well. And when I first started off, I did it all wrong. I went out and bought 20 cases of water and 100 cans of beefaroni and put them in my garage. I'm like, yeah, I'm good. And I bought a generator, and I had all this stuff, but none of it was organized. None of it was ready. I had to look at the threats I faced, which are mid-Atlantic, East Coast hurricanes, and then worst case scenario, I live near D.C. So if the balloon ever goes up, I'm in deep trouble. I pretty much think I'm going to go put a a lawn chair out and a stick and a marshmallow and just face west and wait for the big flash, and that's going to be it for me. But anything short of that, I want to be ready for. Just like when I talked about at the beginning of the show today in Phoenix, water issues, weather issues, all those different things. Yes, societal collapse, that can happen, but also there are real-world things that happen that you need to be prepared for. Glen Tate, what do you think about all that?
Absolutely. There's a famous phrase coined by Jack Spirko, who does a podcast called The Survival Podcast. It's magnificent. And his tagline is something like, prepping when times get tough or even if they don't. And we need to keep track of that or even if they don't thing. And by the way, when times get tough, we mean like a full-on collapse. There's different levels of that, a good old hurricane, tropical storm, for wildfire out here in the West, could be a massive heat wave there in Phoenix that, is as I think tough as the Phoenix utilities are to heat. I mean, who knows what it could be. It could be a solar, mass solar coronal ejection that isn't an EMP but has kind of some of those effects. And it might last 3-4 days, and you're going to be way better off with just these preps. It doesn't have to be the end of the world. Be smart and buy stuff cheaply now that can make your life a whole lot better if something goes wrong for a while.
That's right, and we are at halftime.
This is the Phyllis Schlafly Report, presenting a daily conservative pro-family perspective since 1983 and continuing the legacy of Phyllis Schlafly. Now, from the Phyllis Schlafly Center Studios, Ed Martin.
President Trump and Joe Biden recently held dueling rallies in Pennsylvania, but there was a big difference in terms of enthusiasm. Biden's campaign kickoff and rally may have drawn a respectable crowd to a cordoned-off thoroughfare in downtown Philadelphia, but Trump attracted thousands more for an energized rally inside a hangar at the Williamsport Regional Airport. You can tell the president is riding high on his 2-year track record of pro-American victories. The American people are primed to vote for another 4 years. Wannabes like Creepy Sleepy Joe and Beto O'Rourke just can't compete with a winning message and a winning history to back it up. In between the dueling rallies, the people of Pennsylvania witnessed the demolition of Bethlehem Steel's empty former headquarters. It used to be the largest building in Pennsylvania's Lehigh Valley, but it turned into a symbol of a failing economy for blue-collar workers when it closed down in 2007. Trump wants to rebuild America's manufacturing power in Pennsylvania and elsewhere. He's been turning that goal into reality for 2 years. In stark contrast to this, Biden's platform seems to be to forget about how China has been eating America's lunch and go back to the globalist free trade policies. At Trump's rally, attendees cheered as the president recognized a supporter who wore a suit designed like a red brick wall and carried a sign saying, "Build me." The elderly Biden was low energy and low key. The only somewhat interesting thing Biden did was to perform the mental gymnastics necessary to call for unity while denouncing everyone who disagreed with him. While Biden's performance may be a bad omen for Democrats, the worst news for them is that Biden's rivals seem even less credible. Beto O'Rourke dropped like a stone after launching his campaign by saying he was born to run. Born to lose seems more like it. Losing a Senate race despite having money to burn is not exactly a stepping stone to the presidency. There is one thing you have to say for Beto and Biden. They really can bring the American people together. Both Democrats and Republicans agree that the likes of Beto and Biden have zero chance of defeating the formidable Trump in 2020.
This has been the Phyllis Schlafly Report with Ed Martin. The book, Phyllis Schlafly Speaks, reflects Phyllis at her best. With powerful words that deliver truth, bring clarity to controversial issues, and inspire action. For your free copy of Phyllis Schlafly Speaks for radio listeners only, look for the link at phyllisschlafly.com or call 314-721-1213. Thanks for listening, and join us again for the Phyllis Schlafly Report.
And welcome back to the Patriot Radio News Hour, 800-951-0592. We are so lucky today that we are joined by Glen Tate and Shelby Gallagher of Prepping 2.0. They're also acclaimed authors of the series A Great State and 299 Days. Now, I don't like quoting communists too much, but Vladimir Lenin here, every society is 3 meals away from chaos. When we look at supply chains, and we know that these big box stores only have maybe 2 or 3 days of supply in the store, they have no warehouses in the back, so it's always the supply chain, that just-in-time freight that has to get through to the store. Glen Tate, can you tell us a little bit about how a disruption could cause problems in our country? And, of course, prepping, how does that alleviate that supply chain problem? If you could talk to us about that.
Yeah, and just-in-time inventory was one of the things that really woke me up, and that's what really the thing that made me think, oh, my goodness gracious, the fragility here. And it's just as you described, there's a couple days maybe worth of stuff at a grocery store, and I noticed this when I went to the back of a grocery store and I watched all these semi-trucks pulling in one after another and unloading stuff, and realized that a disruption could be a variety of things. Floods, and by the way, it doesn't, like we were saying earlier, it doesn't need to be the end of the world. I mean, it could be truckers go on strike. I mean, or diesel is $8 a gallon, and truckers say, I'm going to lose money hauling these Doritos, to Flagstaff, and then they don't. So it's very fragile, and there's not a lot of food. Almost nobody in this country has a clue about just-in-time inventory. I'm going to say 90+% of the population really believe that, Doritos magically appear in Walmart. I mean, they don't even think about how they got there and how they're made and all of that other stuff. And then all of a sudden, after a day or two of a disruption, by the way, the announcement of a disruption, everybody's going to do what they do on the East Coast where you are when there's, a tropical storm or a hurricane, all the bottled water goes first, right? Everyone's going to run in and get all the Doritos. And I just pick on Doritos. I mean, I love them. They're delicious. But, I mean, it's just kind of a thing to... It creates a mental image in people's mind. Anyway, they're going to do a run on those, and they're going to be gone, diddly gone. And then all of a sudden people are going to sit back and wonder. A good friend of mine was a New York Air National Guardsman who was deployed when Sandy, which was really a hurricane, surprising, got all the way up north to New York. He was on Long Island. And he said, you would not believe the viciousness of the people there when there wasn't stuff in the stores, and they really demanded that FEMA roll up and provide them, everything they need. And they were angry, and things turned. He describes it better than I do, obviously, because he was there, and he's got a really thick New York accent, which makes it more fun to listen to. But anyway, he's basically saying things got super nasty, super quick, and that's the problem. Here's the solution. Have stuff. Know how to cook it, know how to store it. Shelby and I, and we're married, by the way, very happily so, I might add. And I wouldn't say otherwise, especially with her on the line, right, and telling all kinds of folks out there in radio land that. But anyway, we're very happily married. We're going to be doing a book here pretty soon on the food element of preps, how to organize food preps, how to buy, how to store, how to layer different kinds of food, and then how to cook different kinds of food with or without electricity and all that kind of stuff, because that really solves these problems. And here's the thing, Glenn, it's amazing to me how inexpensive things are now. 50 pounds of rice, maybe $26 at Costco or someplace like that. And if you store it properly, and it's not hard to do, there's no magic to this, and you store it properly, you've got so much like food, and you don't have to worry about these problems. And it's so simple to take care of this now. It's like, putting a couple dollars worth of fuel, stabilizer in a gas tank, and then running your chainsaw and not destroying a $600 chainsaw because you had the foresight to spend $4 on fuel stabilizer. I mean, that's what kills me. And one of the things I do, and this is in the book and this is real life, it's kind of a good little illustration. I take the receipts from when I buy all this food and I put them in the tubs of food that I store, because when the collapse hits and I or people on my team and family and everything open up these things, I want people to look and see, oh my goodness, the 50 pounds of rice in here that we now get is so valuable and is going to save our bacon big time. Oh my goodness, it was $26. And that's the point. Do it now. It's simple. You don't need to go into debt. You don't need to break the law. There's no law against buying rice, right? And so there's no downside whatsoever. And there's the potential upside is astronomical, because it's not just you and your family you're feeding. You're probably going to have a team, mutual assistance group, whatever you want to call it. You're going to have neighbors, probably, maybe pure charity. You're going to really help a lot of people, including yourself, for, in this example, $26 that you're going to spend on, Starbucks and all that kind of stuff, and just kind of fritter away. So that's the problem, and that's the solution in my mind.
And that's very great. That so true, all that you just said. Shelby, yesterday when you interviewed my buddy Gunnar Rowe, who went through Hurricane Maria, could you believe how, like, on the edge of almost sheer, he could have lost his life down there, and how incredible, what a story that was that he had. And tell me, how does, think about, and all the corruption down there and the failed state that is Puerto Rico. Tell me about your impressions of when you interviewed him yesterday, what you thought about his story.
Well, first, I would love to, because that's what I was thinking of just now listening to Glen Tate. And by the way, I'm in a construction zone right now, and I'm trying to be in the quietest spot, so there's going to be a slight pounding in the background. But how fortunate he managed to, he didn't mean to necessarily, but he had supplies lined up. He had gone to Costco several days over time, the few days before Maria hit. And for that, he attributed saving his life because he had food supplies on hand that others did not, because they didn't gauge the severity of was coming. That saved his life. And so here's the thing, though. What would have happened, I'm going to try and move locations here, what would have happened had he prepped a little bit even more before then? Yeah, so he is a great example of, when we all hear it, Hurricane Sandy, like what Glen just said, oh my gosh, a hurricane's coming, we should go to Costco. Well, and if you've ever been in that situation here in the United States, you go to Costco and 10,000 other people are doing the same thing, and the shelves tend to be very bare. He lucked out, and how that saved his life was amazing. So, yeah, he's not a prepper, and managed to got him over the hump, and it also allowed him to barter for things. Sadly, we didn't get to talk about that much, and if I get to interview him again, that's what I'm going to ask him about, is how he managed to, with his restaurant, to be able to, because he could produce ice with his restaurant equipment, he was able to barter for things that saved his life, too. So, amazing story. I hope to get to talk to him more about it. But, yeah, when you realize how those little small decisions, just going to Costco a few extra times, can save your life, if he had just been a prepper, and kept preps in his home and things like that, how much better of a situation it would have been. And I know what that music means.
Yeah, well, I guarantee you he's a prepper now. I know that for sure.
Oh, yeah.
So when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Glen Tate and Shelby Gallagher of Prepping 2.0. And welcome back to the Patriot Radio News Hour, 800-951-0592. Today we have utility silver on sale. That's fractional material, $50 for $140 a roll. That is great fractional material if you have to barter with it. Just good to have, just in case. Once again, this is a prepper show today. We're talking about prepping. It's good to have that, not only for your financial well-being, but also if you have to barter someday down the road for maybe some supplies from a neighbor. Okay, so good to know. Now, Glen Tate, tell me about Prepping 2.0, your podcast. I think it's Wednesday. Podcast drops today, correct? Tell us all about your podcast and all the topics you cover.
Yeah, it's a labor of love. Shelby and I do the show together, which is fun because we're kind of this, weird couple, but when you think about it, it's not that weird. We have coffee in the morning and we're talking about, oh boy, Gunnar was such a great guest, the Puerto Rico example and everything. So we put it together. We have amazing guests, and that's one of the real strengths of the show. We have great guests on. I've met a lot of people. Shelby's met a lot of people through the years who can provide information. The 2.0 part of it is very intentional in the title. It wasn't just like something we came up with. It really describes what's different about our show, and that's that next level. We were talking about 2008, 2009. You were mentioning, Glenn, about getting some water and some beefaroni. Great reference to the Seinfeld episode, by the way. Thank you. Anyway, so getting some basic stuff. That's Prepping 1.0, and everybody needs to do it. Everybody should have, that kind of stuff. But Prepping 2.0 is the next level. That is, it's focused a lot on community. And by the way, I'm not a socialist. It takes a village to raise a kid. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about people you trust around you, maybe in your immediate vicinity, maybe a little bit farther out, but these are the people that are going to become your tribe. You're going to band together. You're going to need a lot of people to guard stuff because there's 24 hours in a day and an average of 12 hours of darkness, and you're going to need to be in shifts. You're going to need water. You're going to need medical stuff in a collapse, obviously. And so that's what we're talking about. So it's about community. It's about water, this often overlooked topic. You'll die in 3 days in an incredibly excruciating death without water. Water filtration, you want to talk about a return on your investment. Simple water filtration is up there. Communications and not complicated radio stuff with geeky technical details. In fact, I despise that stuff because it gets in the way of practical stuff, and people don't get radios when they're really easy to get, cheap, $20, a piece, Baofangs, and they don't get into it because they think they have to program a computer or something like that. And so it's that practical stuff. And that is to say all this. One of the main things the Prepping 2.0 level is about precious metals, by the way. So with that in mind, that's what the show is about. It's that next level, and our guests help us out. And I don't want to keep talking. I want Shelby to be able to talk because it's her show, too, the 2.0 show.
Absolutely. So, Shelby, tell us about the I Miss America part of your podcast, because I love that part. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's a short little segment we typically try to do at the beginning of the show. And what we do is we pull something from the headlines, which is not hard to do, sadly, these days, where we just look at it and go, oh, my God, it would have never happened 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and now it's normal of America, the Constitution, apple pie, and 4th of July. One that we had recently, I believe it was, Glen, Tate, correct me if I'm wrong, the whole AOC squad, that little squad of 4 people basically standing up at a press conference and espousing and bragging about how they hate America. Yet they've made an oath to serve America, to defend the Constitution, and yet they're standing up basically saying how much they hate America. And that's when Glenn and I look at each other and go, I miss America. Had this happened, I don't know, when he and I were young children, when he and I were in our 20s, this would have been an outrage in the media. Now it's, maybe they have a point. This is not the America we remember. And another great show that we had on this, Jim Fuller. You can go to our website at Prepping2-0 and listen to this podcast. He's older than Glenn and I, and he's like, he has a very passionate moment. He's like, I miss America. I remember when I was a kid in the 50s, and I could do this, and I could do this, and we were smart. And we were taught skills when we were young. And so, yeah, it's the whole I miss America. Those, I miss being, one of the things he said, I miss being able to ride in the back of a pickup truck. Now you get a ticket and a major fine for doing that these days. I miss being able to go out and shoot a .22 in the woods and nobody gets all weirded out because they are hearing gunfire. Oh, my goodness. So, yeah, that's where it's at. That's what we mean by I miss America. And we have a whole line of T-shirts and stickers based upon it. And it's not just a reference to the Miss America pageant, that's for sure.
I totally get that. And, I often say something that was unbelievable 10 or 15 years ago is now completely believable. When people say, oh, I can't believe that's happening, I'm like, no, I flip it right around on them. I say, it's totally believable. Look at our society today and just what's happened. It's scary. Now, as a history teacher, I love teaching about the Oregon Trail and the Donner Party, and the kids just eat that stuff up, because it's like the news in Detroit at midnight. If it bleeds, it leads, and the kids eat that stuff up. When you start talking about the Donner Party that had to live in the Truckee Pass in California with 60-foot snowdrifts, and they had to resort to cannibalism, I mean, that gets kids' attention. I'm like, are you guys prepared at home for, if we have a hurricane around here, are you able to live for a week or two without going to Walmart? And the kids look at me with a blank stare, and I'm like, guess not. So, Glen, Tate, what do you think about that?
Oh, yeah, that's an extreme example, but, you should be prepared for those kind of things. And, of course, it's so simple and inexpensive to do it now. Why wouldn't you? Everybody has life insurance, right? And nobody says at the end of the calendar year, or homeowner's insurance, I didn't, quote, get my money out of that. They say, nothing bad happened, but if it did, I put some pretty reasonable measures in place to either make it not happen or not affect me as much. And you got to look at it that way. We're so dependent on stuff just showing up when we want it, exactly how we want it. That's not the way the world works. Never has, and we're going to find out it never will.
Exactly. We'll be right back with Glen Tate and Shelby Gallagher, Prepping 2.0. Welcome back. Final segment, Patriot Radio News Hour, 800-951-0592. We're joined by Glen Tate and Shelby Gallagher of Prepping 2.0. We have to have you back again for at least another show, maybe another show after that, because we haven't gotten to firearms, training, mindset, fieldcraft, first aid. There's a million things. But you know what? That's why they can go to your podcast and to your website and get all this stuff. So, Shelby, can you please tell our listeners how they can get all things Prepping 2.0? Tell us about your website, your podcast, all that, books, all that. Tell us all about it. How do we find it?
Awesome. It all starts with the website, prepping2-0.com. From there, you can see every episode we've ever done. We have new episodes that are uploaded every Wednesday, so come about early afternoon today. There's going to be a new episode, and that one will be awesome. I believe it will be with Steve Ostakalnis from Alert USA, and the things that are happening in our world that can bring about a class. Fascinating guest. You can see where we are on Stitcher, Podbean, iTunes, all of that. You can also go to, there's a tab there that says shop, where you can go see what I was just talking about, our little T-shirts and stickers regarding I Miss America. We also have a new line called Patiently Awaiting the Collabs. Those have been a lot of fun. The other thing that we referred to, and I encourage people on this show to go look at, in the lower right part of the website, there's a link that says the top 100 things that disappear in a collapse. We talk about that every week, and I think that's so important. That's a good place to start. That's a list that was made from people who survived the Bosnian collapse. And kind of along the same lines of my interview with Gunnar yesterday, what are things that I asked him this, what are things that you wished you to prep for knowing what you know now? And that's a list of 100 things, and we go through that every week. So we really try to make it so that if you start at our website, prepping2-0.com, you can launch off to anywhere. You can launch off and check out Glen's books. You can launch off from there and check out my books as well. Everything starts with that website, prepping2-0.com.
Great. And Glen, tell us more about the podcast. I've listened to it. It is incredible. I love listening to it. It's so smooth and well done. What is Patreon? Because I think that was something you were talking about with your podcast. Tell me about that.
Yeah, Patreon is a service that allows you to join. It's kind of the tech backbone of it, and you join, you become a Patreon supporter for, say, $2 a month, and then you get access to the after show, which is the sometimes hour or more part of the show that we do that's after the regular radio show. We're on 5 radio stations in the West, including our favorite radio station, KHNC, of course, fantastic radio station. But so you listen to the regular show, and that lasts about 52 minutes. And if you have $2 a month, hope you do, then you can become a Patreon and listen to the after show. And you also get the higher the levels of support on that Patreon thing, and that's Patreon. It's on the links on all of our websites and stuff like that. You get cool stuff. You get exclusive, merchandise that nobody else can get. By the way, we have I Miss America AR-15 magazines that have the I Miss America thing, engraved onto the magazines, really high-quality magazines. You want to talk about a conversation starter at the gun range? Holy smokes, that starts some really good conversations. So we do that, but Patreon is a really cool way for people that really love the show to support it. And what do we do with this money? And you mentioned smooth and well-produced show. It sure is. And we have a real live radio producer who costs a lot of money who makes that show fantastic. That's where the money goes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on today, Glen and Shelby. Definitely our listeners are going to hit up your podcast and your books. Well recommended. Thank you so much for coming on. Patriot Radio News Hour. This is one of the best shows we've done in a while. Thank you so much for being on. We'll hear you tomorrow, and thanks again.